Now, the other manuscript is Vaticanus, the Book of the Vatican. In 1843, Tischendorf was allowed into the Vatican Library. Now, that might not be a big deal today, but back then there was extreme antagonism and animosity between Catholics and Protestants. They didn't get along. But Tischendorf was welcomed into the Vatican Library, and he was shown on shelf 1209 a manuscript. And he and later Henry Alford proclaimed it to be the oldest existing Bible in the world. Well, guess what that came to be named? Codex Vaticanus, the book, the volume of the Vatican. And again, it was Tischendorf who dated it to the mid-4th century solely by paleographic means, which is highly subjective. He's the guy that said it's the oldest. Well, Tischendorf was eventually allowed to copy the New Testament portions. He said it took 42 hours. And by the way, Vaticanus does not have the pastoral epistles, 1st and 2nd Timothy and Titus. That makes it even shorter. And I have a whole message on that. I won't get into that here today. But he was allowed to copy it. And later the Vatican prelate, a man by the name of Cardinal Mai, M-A-I, had Vaticanus transcribed and printed in 1857. That transcribed copy made its way to London and to none other than guess who? Westcott and Hort. You know, we heard a lot in the last 4 or 5 years about collusion. I think there was collusion between a number of these guys in the Vatican, and there's reason for that. We don't have time to get into all that here today. But curiously, only a handful of Protestant scholars were ever allowed to see it. Tischendorf did. Samuel Tregelles, a Plymouth Brethren scholar, did. John Burgon was allowed to see it, and Henry Alford. And to my knowledge, those are the only 4 Protestant scholars who were allowed to see Vaticanus. Now today you can look at it on the internet. That came on the internet, about 8 years ago or whatever. But there are problems with Vaticanus. I'm talking just about as a document. First of all, there's no record of its existence prior to 1475 when it appeared in the Vatican Library records. Silent before that. The first record of anyone ever referencing it was in 1523 when Erasmus asked Bombasius, the librarian at that time, to do a little research for him on 1 John 5:7. And based on what Bombasius told Erasmus, Erasmus put 1 John 5:7 in his text. There was some question about it. And when he found out what Vaticanus said, he said, forget it. It's a corrupt manuscript. But anyway, that was 1523. Thanks to digital high-definition photography, and you can go and see this tonight, Vaticanus, on the internet, Vaticanus contains initial drop caps throughout the book, beginning with each biblical book. How many do not know what a drop cap is? All right, so if you don't. How many know what a drop cap is? Or you read my book, didn't you? But a drop cap, I'm just opening up at Ramden here. I just happened to open up to Ezekiel 35. The first word is moreover of chapter 35, and the first letter M is 2 lines tall. It's much taller than the rest of it. And it's a alliterative device. Your word processor will do it for you if you type the right code into it. And just a way of enhancing the text, making it look a little nicer. Well, here's the problem. Drop caps were not invented until the Middle Ages. And you can look at ancient documents, and if there's any text art, usually there's some curlicues at the bottom of the page. But you don't find the drop caps until the Middle Ages. And you look at the artwork in Vaticanus, and it's in color, by the way. It's ornate. And I, in researching this, had communication with a master of art. Someone had a master's degree in art history. He said that absolutely is medieval artwork. Well, isn't that interesting? And it's integral to the text. What that says is that Vaticanus was produced in the Middle Ages. Does 1475 sound the Middle Ages? It's a smoking gun that it was not produced 1,000 years earlier. Moreover, there are clear modifications of the text internally, negating any value as an ancient witness. There's clear overwriting of the text in various places. And it's in modern ink, India ink, which wasn't invented until the mid-19th century. Pagination has been altered, where you see the old pagination crossed out and a new pagination entered, showing that the text has been modified. The last 12 verses of Mark 16 were removed from both, now notice, both Sinaiticus and Vaticanus. Isn't that interesting? And you can go online and see this at the end of Mark 16 before Luke begins. There's a space on the page, and they didn't waste space on those parchments. There's a space that is exactly the space where those last 12 verses of Mark 16 would be. And the plot thickens. The choirs, now I'm not talking about the singing choir, I'm using the word Q-U-I-R-E-S, which basically means sections. The sections of the book, a bound book, if you'll look at it, they're all sections, and normally today in printing it's 16 pages, but they're all stitched together to make the full book. The sections are the choirs of both Sinaiticus and Vaticanus, according to none other than Tischendorf of all people. He said they both were copied by the same scribe. The same scribe. Now, what that says is the only party who had the ability to do that was the Vatican. They had sole possession of Vaticanus. And for several years, Sinaiticus was floating around in Europe, between Sinai and Leipzig and St. Petersburg. And for the section of verses, or the section of the book that contained Mark 16, both by the same scribe. Well, folks, I see the fingerprints of the Vatican all over this thing. But it all goes down to say that it is not a reliable old document. Probably produced in the 1400s. And so we're right back to the oldest and best matter.